Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Halifax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am very, very proud to speak to Bill C-389, affectionately known as the Trans Rights Bill. And I was here for the first hour of debate at second reading when my colleague, the member from Burnaby Douglas, moved the bill and spoke to it. And he pointed out what a historic moment it was. A moment to actually have a debate on transgender issues in Parliament, and that it was the first time that this issue had even been discussed within these four walls in the House of Commons. And the member for Burnaby Douglas, who is a tireless advocate for issues in the rainbow community, he's also the NDP critic on sexual orientation and gender identity policy, he pointed out that while it is a historic moment, or while it was a historic moment in the House, his one regret was that, to our knowledge, there were no transgendered MPs in the House who could speak to this bill and provide a first voice perspective to the importance of this legislation. And, Mr. Speaker, I've been thinking a lot about that since we heard from the member from Burnaby Douglas on that point. I've been thinking about it a lot. I'm a queer rights activist. Since my first meeting at TBL Gay at York University in my undergrad, I have done what I could to stand up for the rights of gay, lesbian, transgendered, and bisexual people in Canada. I have done what I could to be an ally to the rainbow community. But nothing that I can say about our trans rights bill in this House would be a replacement for hearing from the lived experiences of transgendered Canadians. So I'm going to use my time today to bring you some voices, to bring you the voices of people, some from Halifax, others from around Canada, who have contacted me about this bill. Some of them have identified themselves to me as being transgendered, some as trans allies, and some haven't identified themselves one way or another, but they have identified themselves as supporters of this bill. They have all contacted me because they care deeply about what happens to this legislation. They care deeply about transgender and transsexual rights. And I want to share their voices with everyone in this House so that these people have an opportunity to be heard by all MPs in this important debate. Sandra Borneman is a young woman that I have had the privilege of working with in Halifax. She works for the Youth Project in Halifax, and we've worked on some projects together, we worked on some issues together, and Sandra wrote to me and she said quite simply, quote, "Trans people are often victims of discrimination, harassment, and violence. They are all too often denied employment, housing, access to health care, and face difficulties obtaining identification. Trans people are workers, citizens, and beloved members of our families. They deserve respect, equality, and protection from discrimination and violence," end quote. Krista McClellan wrote, quote, I'm writing to you as a constituent to ask that you support Bill C-389 when it comes up for third reading in December, and that you ask your caucus to do the same, end quote. And another constituent of mine wrote, I'm a resident of Halifax and I'm a transgendered person. While I've spent much of my career advocating for the rights of others, examples, African Nova Scotians, persons with disabilities, new Canadians, single parents, gay, lesbian, and bi within my community, I have never been able to find the courage to identify that I am transgendered or to advocate for myself. It was only a few years ago that I disclosed to my wife and adult children that I am transgendered. Perhaps the reason for keeping this a secret, perhaps the reasons have been numerous. For example, not wanting to distract attention from the groups I worked with. Also, there was certainly fear. The fear of discrimination, loss of employment, to hurt my family and friends, etc. There's also a fear of being labeled sick, as I've heard others refer to transgender people so many times. I have become aware of C-389, an act to amend the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code, and I'm asking that you support this bill. As I'm sure you're aware, transgender people cover a wide range of expressions. This includes, most typically, transsexuals and cross-dressers. In my case, I believe the Aboriginal term two-spirited best describes what I am, both male and female. For years, I believed this was a curse, but I've come to realize it is a blessing. It has allowed me to truly achieve all I have in life and to gain a unique perspective in the world. In closing, I do hope that now you can help advocate for me and others by supporting this very important bill. Mr. Speaker, John Ross and Reverend Warren Shell co-wrote a letter to me, and it reads, "We're writing to you today to ask you to support Bill C-389. We are very aware that transsexual and transgender people are among the most marginalized persons in our society. They often encounter great difficulty in finding places to live, employment, and services." Obviously, that was just an excerpt, and I'd like to read an excerpt from a letter I received from Mercedes Allen, who said, "I would like to express my deepest appreciation for your support of Bill C-389 at second reading, and I hope that you will continue to do so when the bill comes up for discussion and final discussion and a vote on Wednesday, February 9th. And she discusses her thoughts about the legislation, and she finishes her letter by saying, "Again, I thank you for your support and all that you've done to support our community. I'm not a spokesman for the trans community per se, but nevertheless believe I can say that your support is muchly appreciated by many." Mr. Speaker, another letter that I received. I'm writing today to contribute my support for Bill C-389. Currently, trans people are only protected implicitly and often face extreme violence and discrimination. Many people live in poverty and have difficulty paying for the daily costs of living and health care. This is largely due to the discrimination and violence that they are subjugated to, including difficulty in finding employment, residence, support networks, and services. It is a testament to the strength of many trans people who have overcome all odds to stand up for their rights. Currently, trans people are underrepresented in governments worldwide. There have been only 2 openly transsexual members of parliament in the world, Georgina Beyer in New Zealand and Vladimir Luxuria in Italy. While a few places in the world offer explicit protections to trans people, Canada does not. I feel it is time for Canada to again become a leader in human rights and offer explicit protections for transgender, transsexual, and gender variant members of our community. I urge you and your colleagues to be a voice for members of your constituency whose protections are at stake, and support Bill C-389. This was from April Friesen. Mr. Speaker, another constituent from Halifax, Stephanie Ehler, wrote to me, and she wrote, "It's an unfortunate travesty that more hasn't been done before now for the rights of persons who are transgendered. The current situation really puts the pressure on you to do all you can to make positive steps forward, and you have my support and encouragement in doing so." And Matthew McLaughlin and Susan Gapka, 2 utterly tireless trans rights advocates, sent me a quick update even this morning just to let me know that 2 studies came out just this week in the United States showing that trans people do face discrimination, despite what we may hear from opponents to this bill. They also pointed out that the areas of federal jurisdiction covered by the bill are some of the most sensitive areas where trans people are affected and where they're more likely to be harassed. Banks, air travel, immigration, customs, prisons, and the list goes on. But these are really important areas that we need to address, Mr. Speaker. And Matt dispelled the so-called bathroom argument pretty succinctly when he said to me, "On the bathroom scare, it's pretty hypocritical considering that this has never happened in any of the more than 100 U.S. and overseas jurisdictions with protection. But washroom harassment has happened to nearly every trans person." Good point, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these letters that I've shared with MPs in the House don't even come close to the number of face-to-face contacts I've had with trans people from Halifax and their allies, who thank me for our support of this bill, and who've shared with me their stories of courage and of fear, of bravery, of anger and terror, of love, of hate, of pride, of power, and about themselves, stories about themselves or people that they love. And I really believe that if every MP had the opportunity to hear those stories and to look people in the eye when they listen to those stories, that they would have no choice but to support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Reprise des débats.
Resuming debate.